Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
I help people commit suicide, but they have to convince me to do it first. Episode 1. A long horror story from Reddit Nosleep. I've worked a lot of odd jobs in my life, being something of a drifter in my adult years, but this is certainly the strangest one. I opened this business myself a few years ago after my own girlfriend committed suicide. She took a pistol and unloaded her brains all over our bedroom wall. Most people think that would make me want to stay as far away from death as possible, but everyone deals with their grief in diverse ways. Me, I thought I would give people a better option. I make people feel good, and then I put them to sleep. Really, I just don't want anyone to ever walk into their bedroom after a miserable shift at work and have to see what I saw that day. Because I'm not just a cold-blooded killer, my payment is simple, $5,000 in cash, and a compelling argument for why I should help them end their life. In this argument, I'm looking for something extremely specific. Some people try to give me a sob story about how nobody has ever had it worse than them, while others weave tales that are so disgusting, they clearly just want me to go ahead and off them for the benefit of society. To maintain my good conscience, I need to know they have absolutely no hope moving forward in life. If I'm not satisfied, I pack up their money and send them on their way. I actually say no more often than I say yes. This isn't because I'm worried about getting caught, mind you. The police officers in my town know all about this little operation I run, they just don't shut me down because they make up a sizable portion of my clientele. Mostly older police officers who have seen too much, are now too hardened to live a normal life. I think law enforcement here would like to know that I'm always an option for them if it comes down to it. Tonight, though, my potential client was a doctor. An older gentleman, with wisps of gray dispersed throughout his dark hair. The days are getting shorter now, and it was late afternoon when I let him inside my apartment, so I was surprised to see him wearing heavily tinted sunglasses. I started to give him the usual greeting, but he cut me off almost immediately. "Please, put these on. It's for your safety." "And mine," he explained in a hurry, shoving a similar pair of darkened glasses into my hand. "Oh, all right," I stammered, putting them on to shield my own eyes. "You can go ahead and set your things down over there and take a seat." I motioned to the living area of my apartment. He dropped a heavy briefcase on the floor and moved towards the chair, but I stopped him. "Sit on the couch, please. You'll want to be able to lie down if we end up going through with this." He followed my instructions, dropping his visibly exhausted body onto the squishy cushions. I joined him in my usual spot, a hard and structured chair I would pull from my dining table positioned at a right angle to the couch. Sometimes this setup makes me feel like a shrink, especially when I'm really in the thick of a story. "Did you bring me what I asked for?" I inquired once he seemed fairly settled as one can be when they're seeking assisted suicide. "Yes," he said calmly, reaching into the briefcase and handing over an envelope full of cash. "Although, something tells me you're more interested in my story." I felt my face flush at this suggestion because it was true. I guess I'm a little sick in the head myself, but the stories are far more important than the money. I need the money to live, sure, but the stories give me a reason to keep living, if that makes sense. "If it's a story you want, young lady, then I've certainly got one for you. It might sound crazy, but I can assure you it is indeed true," he mused, running his fingertips along the lining of a couch cushion. "Sir, I've heard a lot of things. You don't need to worry about that," I reassured him as I crossed my legs and straightened my back, readying myself for what was to come. "Well, I'm a doctor, have been for many years. I've always been comforted by the predictability of the human body. Sure, things can go awry, but anatomy, physiology, these things operate within reason. And I like reason." He paused to let out a long sigh. Go on, I said, leaning into the conversation. Now, I've been seeing this patient for a few months, and she was really convinced something was terribly wrong with her. The lumps, she said, there were lumps forming in her axilla region, what the layperson calls the armpit. Normally that is some cause for concern for a woman her age, could be breast cancer, swollen lymph nodes, all that. I palpated the lumps, I found that they were squishy and mobile, not hard and fixed like one might expect if they were indeed cancerous. But she was absolutely inconsolable, and I knew I wasn't getting off easy. I scheduled her for an ultrasound, just so she could see for herself that there was nothing to worry about. Bodies grow lumps as we get older, you know. I thought of the cysts and skin tags and other abnormalities that had grown on my own grandparents, which will probably grow on me in the future. It didn't help, did it? He chuckled a bit. Hell no, it didn't. She came back right afterward. She just wouldn't accept it. It must be cancer, she said, they just can't pick it up for some reason. I looked at the results myself. I saw the lumps there, but they certainly weren't malignant. I figured they were just lipomas. Do you know what those are? I shook my head, no. You're young, makes sense. Lipomas are tumors, but they're basically harmless. They are slow-growing and made of fatty tissue. They mostly cause cosmetic concern, but if they grow too big, they can obstruct other structures in the body. I proposed this diagnosis to her, but she was beyond reason. Finally, I just offered to open her up and take them out if they were bothering her so much. She practically fell to her knees, begging me, please take this cancer out of my body, doctor. He was almost sneering. What happened after that? I questioned. I wish I had never done it. I don't have many regrets in my life. I have a beautiful wife and 3 kids. I've had a pretty good go at life so far, but, what saw me, it changed all of that. He sounded near tears at this point, but he collected himself enough to continue. Anyway, the day of the surgery came. It was supposed to be a quick, in and out type thing. She was sedated, and when I had her on my table, I briefly felt the lumps under her skin again. I noticed the tumor had filled out a bit more, and it felt like it had that cluster-like quality that some lipomas get. When you open a lipoma up, you either get something like a neatly sealed package of fat, or you get what resembles a fatty bunch of grapes. Now those are harder to remove, and more likely to regrow, but still absolutely normal. The mental image of blubbery grapes dripping with grease made my stomach churn, but I signaled for him to continue. I had to know what he could have possibly seen in this woman's body that brought him to my couch tonight. When I opened her up, it was nothing like that. Not at all. Lipomas are fairly superficial, but I found myself wading through more connective tissue than usual. I finally felt the surrounding tissue give, and I used a probe to expose the mass. And then I saw it, whatever, I don't know. The growth was entirely composed of eyeballs. Small, twitching eyes, staring off in all directions. He illustrated this by using his fingers to point up and down, left, and right. The pupils constricted immediately as they were exposed to the light of the operating room. And then they all fixated on me, all at once. He looked like he was going to be sick. I thought I might be, too. I've been wrists deep in necrotic tissue, I've seen all kinds of things that could turn a stronger man's stomach. But I'd never seen anything like that. I panicked. Instead of taking those things out of her, I just stitched her right up and sent her to recovery. I didn't even check in with her when she woke up. I just left. I contacted the hospital administrators, letting them know that I needed a break. Family emergency, or something. I don't think my job is waiting for me, he remarked, exasperated. Not that I want it anymore, anyway. Years of perfect surgical performance, and one operation has turned me completely mad. Honestly, sir, I think that would break anyone, I countered, trying to soothe him as much as I could. He laughed briefly. I thought I would be back to my normal self after a few days off. What I saw couldn't possibly be real. I thought, maybe I'd suffered a nervous breakdown, he declared with an exaggerated shrug. But the longer I had to sit and really reflect on it, the more I knew, just knew deep down, it was undeniably real. My entire life has centered around reason, logic, order. My work suited me in that way. But now, I don't know what to expect. Ever. And it's driving me insane. A long silence hung between us. My behavior started to worry me about a week ago. I was taking a walk to clear my mind, to erase that image from my mind's eye, from my imagination. He corrected himself swiftly. I was walking down my street when I saw the local stray cat, this tabby I've just always adored. But when I saw him that morning, I was just filled with the most nauseating feeling of repugnance, because its eyes were so enormous. Glimmering in the early morning light, taunting me. What did you do? Did you get away? I cautioned. I got away, that's for sure, but not in a way that I'm proud of, he offered remorsefully. Again, I've heard it all. Just last week a guy sat in that exact spot and spun me a tale about how he murdered and dismembered his kid neighbor, I explained. Well, I pulled him into a little alleyway, and just stared at him for a good long while, my mind filling with confusion leading to rage. I was out of control at that point. I just took my thumbs and... He made a popping noise with his lips. Popped them right out. I hate to admit it, but it made me feel better. Instantly. Was it just the cat? I urged, needing to know. So far, yes. But I can't stop thinking about it. This obsession, it has consumed me. I can't look at anyone anymore, especially not my wife or my 3 girls. All I see when I look at them now is their eyes, distorted and magnified. It takes every ounce of my willpower not to take a spoon right to their eye sockets, just to end the madness. At that point, I think he started to cry from behind those dark glasses. You have no idea how hard it is, and I know I will never get better, because even though you're wearing those glasses, all I can think about is your eyes and how phenomenal it would feel to just force them right out of your skull. I squirmed a bit in my seat. It's not often that a client will indirectly threaten me like that. And I'm sorry for that, I'm so sorry, but it is the truth. Please, you have to help me, he sniveled. I was satisfied then. His debt to me had been paid in full. Please lie down on the couch now, I'm going to prepare the injection. I'm not going to go into massive detail about the entire process, it all feels pretty mundane to me now. First I ready the needle, then find a vein. At that point, I'll usually ask if my client has any last words before we begin. The doctors were, please don't watch me as I die. I want to die in peace, and I know I can't do that if I know your eyes, if I know you're looking at me. I didn't. I have more respect for my clients than disregarding their last wishes. Once I was sure he had passed, nice and peaceful, I removed those tinted glasses. The multitude of scratches, swollen and bruised, surrounding his glassy eyes confirmed what I already knew. He had tried to extract his own eyes before seeking my services. This fact only solidified my judgment. There truly was no hope left for him. I mentioned last time that a sizable portion of my clientele comes from law enforcement, mostly the ones who care so deeply about their work that it ultimately destroys them. Coincidentally, my client last night was a police officer. I was entirely perplexed when this man sought me out. He was a highly ranked missing persons investigator with a public presence. From the outside looking in, he was unshakable. That's the interesting thing about my line of work, though. I am one of few in my clients' lives, most often the only one, who truly gets to look inside. Nevertheless, I have a policy of not turning a potential client away until I hear their story, so we scheduled a meeting at my place. He wanted to see me right away. When he arrived, he looked nothing like the sturdy man I'd seen on TV. He was clearly in a hurry, so we made our way to the living room immediately. I had my usual setup in place, and I assumed my position on the chair while he perched on the edge of the couch. "Is it okay if I smoke?" he requested. I popped out of my chair to fetch an ashtray from the windowsill. "No problem. I try to make my clients as comfortable as possible in their remaining hours." "Thank you, I've heard you're a kind young woman. I really appreciate it." "It really is no problem, sir." I took my seat again. "Before we start, did you bring payment?" He nodded as he reached first inside his coat to produce an envelope, then toward me to relinquish the cash. He lit up a cigarette and discarded the extinguished match in the ashtray. "I haven't smoked since the birth of my children, but, well, I suppose that's all changed now." I took this last response as an opportunity to begin. "So, what exactly has changed recently?" I observed him weighing the question in his mind, attempting to locate a suitable starting point. He took a long, exaggerated drag off his cigarette. "Well," he commenced, exhaling a plume of smoke with the word. "I just solved the biggest case of my life, that's what." I cocked my head to one side. "Excuse me, sir, I'm not sure I understand." He chuckled lightly in response. "I'm not sure I do, either." His eyes tracked the smoke trailing off the end of his cigarette. "I've been working on this case for years. It was a cold case, so it was remarkably hard to crack. A young girl, here one day, then." He made a tight fist with his unoccupied hand, then opened it suddenly like a magician revealing the turn. "Gone the next. It's been 10 years now." I bobbed my head in response. I interviewed everyone. Parents, teachers, friends' parents, neighbors, hell, anyone who had ever come into contact with the girl. I worked days, nights, and weekends. My wife had passed away by then and my children were grown, so immersing myself in my work wasn't so important anymore, he explained, pausing to smoke. A long column of ash had formed at its distal end. I urged him on. "So, when did you get a break in the case?" "Today." "The when isn't as bothersome to me as the how," he clarified, crossing his arms over his chest. "Okay, how did you get a break in the case? I imagine you'd be pretty excited to finally get answers to this obsession of yours," I cautioned. "Hell, so did I. And yet, life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you want in the worst way possible." I was on my way to follow up on the first legitimate tip we've gotten for this case in years. I have this habit of being perpetually early, and I realized I was near my daughter's neighborhood, so I decided to drop by for a quick visit. I'm remarkably close with my children. After my wife passed, we had to be there for each other. The three of us were all that remained of our family. "I'm glad you have each other, that you could help each other through such an awful time," I remarked. "Yeah, it was nice," he mused. My daughter's car wasn't in the driveway, but I noticed my son's parked across the street. My daughter is a little guarded about her home, so that was surprising. He flicked the mass of ash off of his cigarette. I decided to check in, and I found the front door unlocked. I leaned forward. "And your son was there?" I called out to him, no response. I almost left, thinking maybe they had taken her car to run an errand, but I noticed something that convinced me otherwise. His keys, phone, and wallet were spread out on the counter next to a salad bowl. I couldn't imagine my son going anywhere without at least his phone and wallet. So, I started searching for the house. I gestured for him to continue as I questioned, "Did you find him?" I tore through the house, up and down the stairs, but he was nowhere to be found. I was stumped, that is, until I entered the storage room out back. I spotted a rug that had been kicked up, exposing a door. It was open, and I found that it led down to a basement. And then I noticed my son, his body, it was lying lifeless at the bottom of the staircase in a pool of spreading blood. I gasped audibly in response. He fell down the stairs? That was my first thought. I barreled down the steps, eager to assist my son. As soon as I reached him, I knew there was no hope. He was gone. Not only that, but he also had a gaping wound to his neck. My eyes widened. I could have never anticipated that. But what happened next was even more unexpected. He suspended his story momentarily, stoking my interest. He crushed his cigarette into the ashtray and immediately lit a new one. I found my girl. Your daughter? I pressed. No, not my daughter, he answered gravely. In the back corner of this hidden cellar, I found the little girl I'd spent 10 years searching for. She was curled up in the back of a cage, covered in blood, and he recalled, voice wavering. She was repeating to herself, I'm a good girl. I'm a good girl. I'm a good girl. He broke down in tears, submitting to his anguish. I wonder if my son realized who she was, what he'd found, before she mauled him to death. I clapped my hand over my mouth, jaw dropping. Why had she been kept down there all this time? I inquired, not sure I really wanted to know. I don't think he wanted to answer either. He locked his eyes on the floor while he inhaled his cigarette. I knew I'd find out soon, because at that moment I heard my daughter pull into her driveway. I nodded my head in silent acknowledgement. My daughter was hysterical when she realized what had happened, what I'd discovered. I had to cuff my own daughter. Do you have any idea how hard that was for me? He demanded, pointing a finger at me indignantly. That's awful, I offered, though I knew nothing I could say would be nearly enough to ease his worn spirit. He eased up a bit, shaking his head gently. Later in questioning, she confessed to everything. My daughter had kept this girl as a pet. Locked her down in that basement in one of those enormous dog kennels. She wrapped her neck in a heavy collar, washed her in a large basin, and forced the girl to relieve herself on newspapers that lined the crate. God, I just can't stop thinking about how some of those papers must have covered the news of her disappearance. His voice caught a bit there. He tapped some ash off his cigarette, collecting himself. She even had her eating raw meat. My stomach turned at the thought. My daughter explained that she had been completely taken with the girl because she looked, and I quote, as blissful and carefree as a puppy, he scoffed, his disgust readily apparent. One day, she laid in wait for the girl, carrying a damn leash. I noticed my own fists clenching as I braced myself for the rest of the story. She approached the unsuspecting girl, jingling the leash in her hand. She told the girl she'd lost her dog and asked if she would help look. That poor, sweet girl, of course she said yes. He trained his eyes on the floor before adding through gritted teeth, my daughter even had the nerve to say, the little thing didn't know it then, but she was the perfect dog I'd been looking for all along. I cringed. That's terrible. The man exhaled deeply. You can say that again. My daughter bashed her over the head with a rock and carried her body, limp and unconscious, back to her car. By the time the poor girl came to, she was already trapped in her new prison with that thick leather collar fastened around her little neck. I stared at him in disbelief. Over the years, I guess she just broke the girl. She kept her muzzled after the neighbors started to hear her barking. He took a moment to wash his cigarette. She insisted that her pet loved her, needed her. She beamed with pride as she explained that the girl would whimper and sometimes wet herself with excitement whenever she came down to cuddle and play with her. He seethed, fists clenched so hard his knuckles blanched a sickly white color. She said she'd done it because she was not allowed to have a dog and she was little, and from there the obsession only grew, becoming distorted and perverted. A dog wasn't enough anymore. Go on, I found myself instructing. He took a lingering drag before continuing, she could have been locked in that damn cage until the day she died, although death would have been a kindness at that point. But my daughter didn't properly secure the muzzle when she left the house this morning. I can only speculate upon what happened next. I gestured for him to proceed. My son stopped by to return a salad bowl he had borrowed from my daughter. She wasn't there, so he probably let himself in with the spare key. He exhaled a long pillar of smoke before extinguishing his cigarette. When he got inside, he must have heard the muted sounds of a dog barking and crying, which he would have followed to the concealed door. Thinking an animal must have gotten in there and was probably hurt, he must have grabbed some tools to cut the lock. I can only imagine the horror he felt when he found the girl. He likely freed her from the crate. Same thing I would have done. And then she rushed him, toppled him over, and tore into his neck with her teeth. A dense silence fell over the room. Sir, you couldn't have. Don't, the man cut me off swiftly, harshly. Please, just, don't, he added, his voice softening again. I've been through all those countless times in my head. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he immediately shifted his gaze. Worst of all, about a year into the case, I dropped by my daughter's house for an unscheduled visit. I was only there for a few minutes before she practically shoved me out the door, citing a migraine. My daughter could be flighty, but never rude, he insisted. Only now am I able to make the connection. I had heard a dog yelping faintly, as if from a distance. When I asked her if she'd finally gotten that dog she'd always begged me for, she hastily explained that her neighbors were fostering me, and then she demanded I leave. I wish I could explain the look on his face as he disclosed this to me. I can only liken his demeanor to Atlas bearing the weight of the heavens upon his shoulders. I assume she will plead guilty, at least? I cautioned. The man threw up his hands in an exaggerated shrug. He wheezed with sudden laughter, a manic look appearing in his eye. Plead guilty? At what trial? Did I say I called for backup? Brought her to the station? Maybe a better man, a better police officer, would do that. Me, I forced the confession out of her. After she told me everything, I beat her so savagely that she didn't resemble my daughter anymore, because she wasn't. I cut off all her fingers with a pair of garden shears. I think I was trying to give her pause, maybe. And then I strangled her with that leash before throwing her down the stairs to rest with her beloved pet. I called to report the scene, and now I'm here. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. The man looked me square in the eye as he asserted, something has changed in me. I no longer seek justice, only revenge. My past work is all just a sick joke now. What good did I ever do as a police officer? I squeezed the life out of my own daughter, the criminal who had eluded me for so long, and it felt better than any arrest I've ever made. It makes me question if I've always had this in me, and I doubt I'll be able to stop now. The conclusion of his story was suffocating. Thank you, sir. That's all I need. If you're ready, I'm going to prepare the injection. The man sat, silently smoking his last cigarette, while I gathered both my composure and my materials. He snuffed his cigarette out in the ashtray, and I instructed him to lie down. As I steadied myself to insert the needle, I asked, any last wishes? Could you please put it on the radio or something while I go? I can't get my daughter's voice out of my head, not how she sounds now, but as a little girl. She won't stop asking me for that damn dog. I fulfilled this request, but I don't think it helped. As he slipped out of consciousness, he repeated in disturbingly juvenile voice, "Doggy, daddy, doggy."
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.